Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this live broadcast from the IMAN Center in Kirkland here on the 12th of Muharram. We begin our program with the recitation from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال ربك للملائكة إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة قالوا أتجعل فيها من يفسد فيها ويسفك الدماء ونحن نسبح بحمدك ونقدس لك قال إني أعلم ما لا تعلمون وعلم آدم الأسماء كلها ثم عرضهم على الملائكة فقال أنبئوني بأسماء هؤلاء إن كنتم صادقين قالوا سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم قال يا آدم أنبئهم بأسمائهم فلما أنبأهم بأسمائهم قال ألم أقل لكم إني أعلم غيب السماوات والأرض وأعلم ما تبدون وما كنتم تكتمون صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you very much, Brother Kareem. I'm going to request Sister Nafisa to help us in the reading in English, please.
I seek refuge in Allah from the rejected shaitan. In the name of Allah, the Lord of mercy, the giver of mercy. Prophet, when your Lord told the angels, I am putting a successor on earth, they said, how can you put someone there who will cause damage and bloodshed when we celebrate your praise and proclaim your holiness? But he said, I know things you do not. He taught Adam all the names of things, then he showed them to the angels and said, tell me the names of these if you truly think you can. They said, may you be glorified. We have knowledge only of what you have taught us. You are the all-knowing, the all-wise. Then he said, Adam, tell them the names of these. When he told them their names, God said, did I not tell you that I know what is hidden in the heavens and the earth, and that I know what you reveal and what you conceal? Sadaqallahu alayhi.
Thank you very much, Sister Nafisa, for that reading in English. Let me stop sharing my screen here. And Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Welcome to this live broadcast as well as a Zoom session planned for today. We completed our 12 days of majalis yesterday with Sayyid Hasan Rizvi. We really appreciate Maulana's flexibility. Originally, he was supposed to visit us from Florida, but given the COVID situation, things didn't really work out the way we had hoped that they would work out. So we had to do these remote sessions, and alhamdulillah, it's worked out quite well. And yesterday we completed, like I said, the 12 lectures. And Maulana's topic was from mu'min to Muslim. This was the from a Muslim to mu'min was the theme of his lectures, and he touched on various topics, starting with identity and how our identity should be rooted in Tawhidi principles, and whether the God exists or doesn't exist. How can we have a discussion with those people who do not believe, just from a non-religious sources, on the proof and the existence of God? Is this a just God or not, and why God sends prophets and so forth? So there's a lot of topics, and obviously Maulana had a very tough time, because the audience we have is pretty wide and varied, both in terms of the backgrounds, educational backgrounds, the age levels, and the life experiences, and so forth, right? So I'm sure that each one of us receives a message in a pretty unique way to how we decode his message, and Maulana also comes from a different context. So there's probably a lot of room and opportunity for us to better understand him, or unconfuse ourselves, or maybe help Maulana unconfuse himself. You never know, right? So this is the idea of the session today, was for us to ask him any questions on what he has spoken about, and get him a chance to elaborate or to clarify. And I suspect that even the time today will be short. This by no means will exhaust all the things we may want to ask him. So if we are not able to follow up today, we can, I'm sure, have sessions in the future. Now, for today's discussion, I will like to moderate the discussion. And what I request everybody is that if you have a question, please go to the chat screen on Zoom and type your question, right? And we will take the questions in the order in which they were typed, right? And we will first give priority to those questions that are pertaining to the topic that he has talked about. So if you ask a question that is not related to what he's talked about, we may not pick you, even though you may have typed it sooner than other questions, right? Our idea is to make sure that the subject matter he's touched upon is clarified. So with this, please go ahead and type away, ask away, and whilst you're doing that, I'm going to give an opportunity to Maulana to also do his preamble before we start the session. Maulana, welcome to our Zoom session here. I hope you're online now.
Sure. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. مؤمنين مؤمنات, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I hope all of you are doing well, inshallah. Your azah has been fruitful and beneficial, inshallah. And if I'm waiting for your comments and questions, obviously, but whatever you have, look, I know that the topics that were addressed are not the normal sort of topics, and this is what I mentioned last night, right? These are not the normal topics which are addressed in the center. And I do personally believe, in my own kind of humble opinion, that these are the things that need to be discussed in our centers. And as controversial as some of the points may have been, I do feel like, at the very least, even if nobody is willing to change their minds, which is fine. I mean, people have, again, different approaches, as Jawad Bhai was alluding to. Just being able to open it up and at least have the discussion in the beginning, to at least recognize that there are different approaches that, they're backed by Quranic evidence, narrative evidence, rational evidence, metaphysical evidence, whatever it is. We should recognize that this is going to happen since we are in a time when we are we're without our imam, right? We have indirect access at this point. So there's going to be many issues where we are going to clash, we're going to differ. And I think one of the main issues that we do face in our communities is that we are unable, many times, to have respectful disagreements. And sometimes it ends up coming into legal disagreements, which doesn't make any sense. If one person follows their marja, somebody follows another, there's really no reason, no room to argue. You're following different marja. Of course, they're going to disagree. That's just the nature of it. And the same way, if you had different doctors which gave different opinions, the same thing would happen. This is just the nature of the school of the Ahlul Bayt at this point, is we have differences. And even if we had the Imam with us, we would also expect him to give different pieces of advice to different people as well. So we shouldn't expect uniformity all the time, right? You can still have unity without having uniformity. And I think that's very, very essential for our day and age right now, especially since we are being, as Muslims, there's an affront, there's an attack, and sort of it's insults coming from many different sides, right? We, for example, from even within the Islamic diaspora, being a minority within Muslims, we get attacked from certain other sects. Among other monotheistic religions, right? Sometimes from Jews or Christians, we also get attacked for our beliefs. And then of course, from atheists, we'll get attacked from there. So there will be, responses that we'll have to give to these ideas. So it is a great idea for us to try to find where we can find those commonalities, and that's wonderful. In the same light, where there will be differences, we should be working together to figure out how we can educate ourselves more and more so that we can understand other people's approaches. And again, like I said, at the end of the day, we may still disagree, and that's okay. But perhaps at the very least, we could understand and maybe empathize with somebody else's approach to how they've done that. And assuming that they've approached it in an educated manner. Now, again, one of the things that I try to hopefully highlight within the lectures is that, look, asking questions is wonderful. Bringing in your own opinion humbly is great as well, right? And if it's from an inquisitive point of view. But if the idea is somebody can really think that after just, being what they call sahib mimbar, right? Meaning you're just sitting at the foot of a mimbar for 30, 40 years, or reading one or two books, or browsing some articles, or just being able to just think about an issue entitles one to really just pontificate about the deeper issues of Islam. We have to really think, wisely. Is that really how any other discipline works, right? And you have many, in the Hawza itself, or in the academic world, people spend their whole lives just thinking and analyzing and coming up with one, sort of theory. And even then, you'll see at the end of the books of our scholars, they'll say, Wallahu a'lam, Allah knows best, we don't know, this is our best guess. So we should follow in the footsteps of our scholars, recognize the difference of opinion, respect one another, and hopefully try to grow as best as possible. So I think we'll leave it at that, and then...
Thank you very much, Maulana. It's very good. And let me just, before I go into the questions, I want to make sure that we are not really getting into an area which is not accurate, right? I mean, most of the feedback we have received has been extremely positive. People who have really appreciate it. I mean, in fact, they have said it's quite nice, refreshing for somebody to come to our centers and raise and discuss those topics that our children are grappling with, right? One of identity, and when the belief are being questioned, because this is exactly what they're facing. So, they're 8-year-olds or 7-year-olds saying, does God exist? So, I mean, I think the by and large, the feedback has been extremely positive, right? Obviously, there'll be some people who will actually say, hey, look, either I don't agree with some of the things you said, or, maybe your lecture could be a little bit more deeper. So I don't want us to kind of get consumed by that, okay? I want to make sure that we have a holistic view of how your thing was perceived. Having said that, like I say, I want to make sure that we use this opportunity to clarify. One of the questions that was posed to me on Sunday, and I said I will bring it up here. This actually is a question from India, by the way, Mumbai, because your questions have traveled far and wide, okay? I mean, that Tanzania also people are watching you, because I've been sending you our lectures all across. So here's a question that came to me on Sunday at 12:52 in the afternoon. It says, Hazrat Qasim was son of Imam Hasan and Ali Akbar was son of Imam Hussain. I do not understand where the preacher read that they were from different tribe and their body was taken away by the different tribe within the battlefield, and only Imam Hussain was trampled with horse. In the sermon, it is the duty of the preacher to respect the body of the martyr and not to say the Imam body was naked in no clothes. The best way is to say that the body was badly trampled. My recommendation to the organizer to respectfully inform the preacher. So I've done my duty. I already responded to him my own way, but I want to give you the chance so that you can respond and he'll be able to hear your response also.
Sure. And I appreciate, this person's question and anybody else, right? So, look, the topic of the historical events, meaning the specific historical ideas behind Karbala, it's a sore subject. It's a tough subject. I think it's even more controversial than the identity one, obviously, because many of us have grown up with a very specific narrative, and that narrative has formed our identity, right? And when we're talking about the greater identity, and what's happened, and this is with all due respect to all my elders who are present here, that same story which has been told from the mimbar year after year after year, there's a few different options. generally speaking, especially given the preachers of the subcontinent, right? I'm focusing specifically on the subcontinent because that's where I'm from. I have a Pakistani background. And I know of the ones in Pakistan, in India, those same ones who would travel to Africa, who would speak there, and then of course would come to North America and even places in Europe and recite. We have different types of speakers, right? We have Zakirin, who, again, out of love for Ahlul Bayt, they're speaking and they're not necessarily Hawza trained. Maybe they're not even academically trained, but they're good orators. They read some books and then they share that information. So they're not researchers or anything like that. They just are good at, spreading the message of the Ahlul Bayt in that sense. They're going to give a certain story, generally speaking, right? So again, forgive my generalizations here. I'm just going by the kind of inductive evidence that exists that I think most people would be aware of. Zakirin like that, who have been using the minbar for many, many, many years, and the history of how they ended up where they were, which I think we can leave for now. It's very interesting for those who want to research of how they came about. Khair. The issue that's usually brought up is that initial story that many of us have heard about how people died, how they went out, their ages, everything that's there. They may be found in books, but how historically accurate were those stories? Now, us who are sitting, listening to this person on the minbar, most of us don't have the ability to even question those stories, right? Now, some of you may have read, different historical sources, and that's fine. So that would give you the ability to question. But I'll tell you, when I was a kid, anybody that came, sat on the minbar and spoke, I just assumed them to know what they were talking about. So I picked up a certain version of the story of Karbala, and I heard that year after year after year. The first time I had either picked up a book or heard contrary, then obviously my identity got shattered. I said, how is this? They said that Ali Akbar was some sort, and originally I heard he was this age, but then this preacher said he was a different age. Now, first, is that really something that should, cause us to shake and get anxiety? Like age numbers or like the status of things here and there? Personally, I don't think so. The tragedy of Karbala is the tragedy of Karbala. All these details, which for some people may be major, for some people may be minor, regardless, the tragedy still stands the way it is. There was oppression, far and wide, from the beginning up until then, all the way until they had returned to Medina. The oppression is there. I think to argue or to nitpick over small little details, I don't really see myself where there's actually benefit. Now, again, from a historical perspective, we can look at it. No doubt, we can analyze that. We also need to recognize that from even among the ulama, the trained historians, there is no single narrative about Karbala. It doesn't exist. There's famous narratives, and that's fine. But just because something is famous or ma'ruf or mashhur doesn't automatically mean it's the most accurate. It could just be the one that's been told very often. So you'll hear sometimes preachers use the more famous version, knowing that it's possibly true, not saying that it's false, but they may think that one other version is maybe equally true, but maybe less famous, and they may not recite that. Why? Out of respect for those who are listening, because there's no reason to stir up a controversy in the middle of a center, right? And every preacher has their own sort of, let's say, standard operating procedure about how they want to conduct tabligh. As far as my limited research, I'm by no way a historian. History is probably the last subject that I have interest, but I don't really spend much time researching it. As far as the details that I've mentioned, as far as the bodies and tribes and this and that, these are mentioned in some of the books. And a person, if they're interested, they can look at the various ones, which there's many, which the persons, if they're from Mumbai, they can read it in Urdu. There's many translated then. If they want to look in English, you can look at Abu Mikhnaf, you can look at Muharram. I forgot how many are in English, but there's multiple different versions. They can take a look. I'm not going to be the one to tell you which one is more accurate. Some may say, go to the one that's the earliest, which would be the Abu Mikhnaf version. But there's a disagreement among ulama whether that's really the most accurate or whether the version of Abu Mikhnaf that we have is actually the real Abu Mikhnaf, right? So this is up for historical debate. This is my own personal understanding. When we recite the masa'ib, the musibah, the gham, I don't think people should be there for a history lesson. If you want history, you need to go to a history class, you need to read books. History is a different topic. The gham and musibah is more of a devotional, it's ibadah. As for me, as somebody who, my main focus happens to be on the lecture, the musibah, definitely, I give it importance. The emotional aspect is needed. I don't believe in just giving information, education, and leaving the musibah. No, we need to have our hearts in there as well. But I'm going to go by whatever I feel based on my own limited research. I'm going to give that version. And if I feel another version maybe is a little less accurate, I may not give that version. So based on my own limited research, as far as the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was concerned, as far as what I've seen, they say that this is the reason Imam Hussein, before he went out, he tore his shirt because he knew that they would loot his body. So he tore it. And then some of the narrations say they took every single thing from his body. They took his ring, and in order to get his ring, they had to cut off his finger. In order, just for the clothes themselves, they ripped it off his body and they left him like this. Now, that's obviously, it's beyond us to understand because we are not used to that sort of depravity. But this army of Umar ibn Sa'd, that's how they were, unfortunately, right? So that's that one part. The other part about, the tribes and this and that, again, according to many of the historical narrations, what they say is that the only body which was trampled on that day, on Ashura, in the afternoon, was the body of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, because no one came forward as far as tribes from the army of Umar ibn Sa'd, for example, and nobody claimed the Imam in that sense. Everybody else on the other side, they had people who were still part of their tribe. And unfortunately, the problem with those Arabs who were on the side of Umar ibn Sa'd, their Islam was very weak, it's obvious, but their tribalism was intact. And for them, tribalism mattered sometimes a lot more than religion did. So they said, look, even though we were willing to kill Abbas and Ali Akbar and Habib, etc., they were willing to kill them. But for them, it was a disgrace to see the bodies being trampled. They said, no, we won't allow this. This will dishonor our tribe. So you're not allowed to do that. If you do that, we'll go to war with you. So they said every single tribe that was present there, for everybody, it was done. It was taken away. And the only one left was Imam Hussein. I haven't seen other versions. There may be other ones there. If the person who's sent the question has a more authentic source or would like to share with me something, then feel free to share, and I can stand corrected, and that's no problem.
Thank you very much. I think Abu Miknaf is one of the earliest historians on the tragedy of Karbala. There might be a good things, and also I would say that Ayatollah Mutahari has done a series of lectures on deviations and distortions of Karbala. That might be worth reading. Yeah. So the next question here is, in your lecture on Ashura night, you shared how Imam Hussein was crying because he would be the reason that the army of Yazid would go to Jahannam. And on another night, you spoke extensively about the love and the mercy of Allah. How then do we understand the use of cursing in many supplications, amal in Muharram, and even in Ramadan? This seems inconsistent with the actions of the Prophet and Imams.
Hasan, wonderful question. It's one that comes up in most Muharram related Q&As, although sometimes in Ramadan when we do la'an on the killers of Imam Ali alayhi salam. So the topic of la'an, the first thing which I think catches my attention is the word cursing itself. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard that the word curse itself may not be, it probably is the least accurate translation of the word la'an itself. Now, the topic of la'an, it requires its own discussion as well. So I can only do it, minor justice in that sense. But what we have to figure out first is this idea of performing la'ana, meaning reciting this specific dua, is this outside of God's mercy or not? If it's within God's mercy, then there should be no problem. But the way that the questioner is framing it is that it seems automatically that they have an idea in their mind that asking Allah to do something, if we're taking this sort of literal understanding of la'na, of taking away God's mercy from a person, automatically becomes unmerciful by definition, right? If I'm saying, Allah, take away your mercy from Yazid, well, doesn't that go against, mercy and love? So there's many different understandings about la'na. Now, the one that, again, I've grown up with, and I'm sure many of you have grown up with, is that it sounds like a very sort of, forgive me for saying it this way, but a very hateful thing, meaning you have to have this hate in your heart to do la'na on this individual, right? And many would say that. Yes, I hate Yazid, I hate Umar ibn Sa'd, I hate Shimr, I hate all these individuals, that's why I do la'na. And that's the understanding of many scholars. They will give that interpretation, especially the traditional theologians. That's how they describe it. Because they're saying, we are praying to God that Allah take away your mercy from this individual, right? Or sometimes you would even, in Urdu, maybe call it bad dua, right? In that sense, like a negative dua. Okay, that's one understanding, that's fine. For those who have more of a philosophical or a mystical irfani approach, their understanding of la'na is a bit different. They consider it a part and parcel and an extension of Allah's mercy. Now you might be thinking, how is that possible? If we're praying for God to take away his mercy from somebody, isn't that by definition unmerciful? Well, we have to understand how love and mercy works. And I did give this example in the discussion of justice too. So the example we gave there was about when a child, let's say a newborn has to get their shots, right? Booster shot, vaccine, etc. You now have to hold them down in order so that they can get the vaccine or shot. From one perspective, you are, again, if we're using modern language, that child is not consenting. You're going against their free will. You're harming them by holding them down forcefully. Some would say, like, oh, you're oppressing the child. But the whole point is we see in a long-term picture what's better for that child. We know that they need this vaccine. It's better for them. So for the philosophers, some of them, and the Urafa, they say, look, what do we really mean by la'na? And what does it mean as a sense of love? And let me give now another analogy to make it, I think, a bit clearer. When somebody commits a crime in our society, what do we kind of do for them, right? Now, crime and punishment is a big discussion, but normally the sort of normal way that you and I think about crime and punishment is that a person needs to go to jail, they have to suffer for their crime. Very similar to the traditional idea of la'na, right? Suffer for what you did. For the sort of initial idea behind how the prison system should work was that it's not meant for it's not a place meant for somebody to suffer. It was meant for them to be rehabilitated. They were meant to learn what they did wrong and to learn how they can come back to society, how they could learn how to function again in society, to go back to their true nature. That was what the original intention of, let's say, punishments or criminal law, prisons, etc. That's what it was for, right? And that's why usually harsher punishments, they say, are meant as deterrents. It's out of love that we make harsh punishments so that you don't do it in the first place. Now imagine, I tell you, if you do something like offend or distort or kill a prophet or somebody of the prophet's family, then you will incur this sort of divine wrath from God. In a sense, in one level, that's a deterrent. It should be a deterrent. But we see the depravity of these individuals. So now what do? Okay, we take it to the next step. They have gone and committed those actions. They are these divine criminals. So what do we want to do now? They don't belong in a society. They don't deserve God's greatest mercy, which is life in this world. Life in this world is an opportunity for you and I to do God's ibadat, right? To get closer to Him, to perfect ourselves. These individuals, like Yazid, like Umar ibn Sa'ad, like Ibn Muljam, like Shimr, and all the rest, they have pushed past the tipping point, right? If you can kill somebody, the grandson of the Prophet, you've gone beyond the normal, schema of how to function as a human being. Their fitrah is completely polluted. The best thing for them is to be removed from that mercy of living in this world and to move on somewhere else, to the next world. Because at least for them, they can stop sitting in this world. Only a person who understands God's divine love can think of something like that. We want them to be rehabilitated. Not that we want them to suffer and punish. Again, that's a theological understanding. But for somebody who sees every single action of God as coming from love, God does not want His beings to suffer for the sake of suffering. He may want them to suffer for the sake of a vaccination. He may want them to suffer for the sake of improving themselves, even if it's somebody as depraved as Yazid or Shimr or any of these individuals. Meaning, because of the level they've reached, we do this sort of la'na so that they maybe will reform themselves through whatever God decides. If they can't, then Allah, okay, take their life away, so put them in barzakh. In barzakh, they'll go through that burning, that trial, that tribulation, and the punishment. Maybe if they're cleansed, they'll learn their lesson, and then maybe they can improve themselves and then move on towards Allah. So this is a different approach that some of the philosophers and the mystics take, that la'na itself is a praying for somebody to get rehabilitated. But again, this is not the normal way that we've heard it, and I'm sure there's going to be like 20 follow-ups about this. But this is an approach that comes from the idea of love. And with the Urafa, the understanding is every single thing is love, although we might not be able to see it on the outside. Outwardly, it doesn't look like it's love, but inside, there's always love there. But outwardly, it may be seeming forceful or harsh.
Now, related to, just a follow-up on this this discussion, right? On Zirat Ashura, there's a reference to the first and second and the third and the fourth, right? I mean, and some people say this is really unnecessary, sectarianly divisive. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's another, again, interesting point to bring up. So, obviously, we have been told by many that we should be striving for unity. Now, if we found out that anybody else from another faith or even among the other sects in Islam, we found out they were cursing the people that we love, we would obviously be like, this is disrespectful, it's not fair. So they use that same argument on us. They say, look, why are you cursing our revered figures? It's not fair. So some may use that as an argument to say, look, this is causing sectarian strife. Let's not use these parts, cut them out. Or some may say, fine, do it, but do it privately instead of publicly. I've heard various different arguments. I prefer to go at in a different manner. So I would say this. Let's say, like Jawad Bhai, you and I are talking about an individual, right? Let's say, I'm sure you've been to Orlando before, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like, hey, Jawad Bhai, do you remember this one person that we both met, Ali Fulan, right? Ali Fulan, right? This really, bad akhlaq. He's stingy. He's always smelly. He never takes a shower. He's always, doing ghiba in front of other people. Like, I hate this guy so much. And then now you are like, Hassan, how could you be saying that? Ali Fulan, every time I'm with him, all he does is talk about Allah. He brings in the names of the Ahlul Bayt. He only talks good. He always wears itar, the best cologne, like this and that. It's like, it's almost as if we're talking about two different people. In our minds, we're talking about the same person, right? The same Ali Fulan individual with the same name. The information I have about him leads me to not like him or hate him or disrespect him or think he's not a good character. The information that you have leads you to think that he's a great character. This is exactly what's happening with us, with these individuals, right? With the khulafa and other so-called, companions. The information that we happen to have in our narrations, and of course, we would also submit to the other side that this is also in your books too, that the information that's being given here is that they did so-and-so to the family of the Prophet, they did so-and-so to Imam Ali, etc., etc. This is what they did. Now, we would tell them, say, look, if there was an individual in history who met these criteria, where they disrespected the daughter of the Prophet, they took away the right of Imam Ali, they said this, they did this, all this, what would you say about the individual? And if they were being objective, they'd say, this person's not a good Muslim. It's like, okay, that's the research we've done, and this is what we've come to conclude. If you've come to conclude differently, that's your own sources. So don't think we're actually cursing the same good person you're talking about. We have a different construction of the individual. So now all that becomes is a difference of which traits are we attributing to the person. So either side, I don't think should take it in that sense personally. Because we're really, in a sense, talking about two different individuals.
Yeah. And, just to wrap this up here, basically, I would say that it's much better for us to focus on the actions of the individuals rather than individuals, right? Because, for example, if Imam Hussein had given up on Hur, he would not have entertained him when Hur came, asking for redemption, right? So I think that, whilst we may not disagree on what actually took place, we can just avoid, saying bad things about people per se. And I think a lot of times Muslims spend more time talking about things for which they are not accountable rather than doing things for which they will be held accountable. So I'll move on. This is a long topic and we won't finish it here. So let's move on to the next question here. This question says, some Islamic teachings are interpreted through culture and are not absolute perceptive. For example, being respectful to elders in an Islamic concept is an Islamic concept, but how you are respectful depends on norms and culture. Do you agree with this assessment? And if so, wouldn't our culture be an important part of our identity?
That's an interesting connection, Hasan. So within Islamic law, for many of the laws, there's the idea of urf, right? Is that there's a principle within the law, it's a general principle, and the application of it depends on your society and your culture and the sort of general notions and perceptions around you. So I think this is a good example you gave as well, right? So right now, let's say, for example, I'm going to use Jawad Bhai every time as the example, if you don't mind, Jawad Bhai, right? I know you're at my khidmat, thank you.
But
so again, let's say
you use me in a good way, not in a bad way, though. I appreciate it.
So Jawad Bhai is obviously, he's my elder, right? Now, of course, he deserves respect for many reasons. One of them, of course, being my elder, but for many other reasons, right? Being a sincere mu'min is more so, but of course, he's an elder as well, so that deserves respect. So now, how would I understand that respect? For example, right now, maybe in our general culture and understanding, that means I have to send him at least one WhatsApp message once a week. And for him, that would mean, okay, he's keeping in touch. Hassan is still, thinking of me, and he's respecting me, right? That could be it. Or if, let's say, I disagree with him on something, I don't say so like, Jawad Bhai, you're wrong. No, you don't know what you're talking about. He may, in our culture, that might be deemed as disrespectful. It's an instance of disrespect. Or if I, again, don't say Jawad Bhai, or maybe he doesn't like Bhai, maybe he wants me to call him uncle, I don't know, right? It's tough to say nowadays, right? What the actual criteria is for age difference. He's young at heart, obviously, but he has the wisdom of an elder. That's why I have to be careful of how I distinguish it, right? So, and again, I'm giving you this specific example because this does exist right now, and I get constant questions about this. I have many families who message me. They say, look, my parents are saying to me, I'm being disrespectful to them after I got married. Why? Because I don't call them every day. So the parents saying, in order for you to respect me, you have to call me every single day. That's their understanding of it. Whereas for a person who's, again, living their daily life, it may be very difficult to say, I'm going to call you every day, maybe once a week or every once in a while, fine. So the actual application of the rule, that's where a person needs to know how their society judges it, right? In terms of khums, the same things apply, right? Khums, for example, so we know, right, it's on the savings left over after your normal expenditures. However, there's another thing that applies for khums too. You have to know your status in society, right? Your economic status. Based on your status, you're supposed to purchase things within your means. So, for example, let's say there is a person in the community who is a doctor or a lawyer, right? Alhamdulillah, nice job, maybe 6 figures plus. If they buy a BMW or a Benz or a Tesla, that's an expected purchase from them. They wouldn't have to pay khums on that, for example, because the people around them in their society, their culture wouldn't see that as an extravagant purchase, right? So there would be no khums liable on that purchase. Now, take another individual in the same community, and they are a cashier at McDonald's. That's great. I mean, we're not discounting the job. They're working. That's great. They're earning halal rizq. That's wonderful. But if that same person, right, like a teenager, is earning whatever, basic, pretty much minimum wage, right, as a cashier at McDonald's, and they go out and buy a new Tesla, wouldn't everybody say, look, this is way beyond your means. What are you doing? This is very strange. Why are you doing something like this? They would have to pay khums on. Even if they needed a car, they're going beyond their social status, right? So every society will have these sort of kind of cultural or internal rules. And the Islamic law applies to those social cultural norms. Now, so so it's a part of the assessment, definitely, in order to figure out how do we apply the Islamic rule in our context. So if you're saying, would it be an important part of our identity? Well, in the sense that in order to practice what God wants, you need to know your urf, your local customs, yeah. But is that your absolute identity? Then you'd say no. Why? Because if where I am right now in the US, the example I gave about Tesla and McDonald's or whatever, that applies here. But now let's say I decide I get up, I leave America, and I move to, I don't know, Norway. And in Norway, let's say because of the economic differences, a person who's a cashier can afford a nicer car. The urf there has changed. So therefore the application of the rule changes. So now my identity can technically shift, right? I wasn't making a Tesla a part of my identity. It was just me figuring out how do I apply Islamic law. So if I bought a Tesla here as a McDonald's cashier, then I would have to pay khums. But if I go in Norway and it was okay for me to do so over there, then I wouldn't have to pay khums. It's just an application of the law. It's not an essential, integral part of my identity, unless you really, really, really love Tesla. But I would even say, is that should that be an integral part of our identity? What we're saying is the integral part of one's identity is about how they define their internal inherent values. How do they view reality? We all have lenses that we view reality from. If that is God-centric, everything comes secondary, you're fine. It doesn't matter which way you look at it from. You're supposed to use your local values, obviously. If you go beyond that and say, for example, well, in Pakistan, they have a different cultural system, so I'm going to apply that over here. Well, that's going to be a problem now because you're not living in Pakistan. Well, I came from, Shiraz and I'm going to apply Shirazi custom here. No, you can't do that. Or in Zanzibar or in Mombasa, we did that. Well, you're not there anymore. We have to be able to live within the context that we are in, the cultural context. But there are certain places in Islam that says apply your cultural context, but there are certain places that say the cultural context doesn't apply. So we have to know where in Islamic law does it apply, which Islamic principles allow for it, and which ones don't. So it will vary depending on the Islamic principle and law. So I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you, Maulana. I will move on to the next question here. This is from a young lady here. She's asked, in your lecture about hospitality, you talked about how in our cultures, when we host event guests should be first. However, you stated that in Islam, the host should be first. Can you please elaborate on this? Thanks.
Sure. So I'm not sure what you mean by elaboration, but let me explain the thing again for those who may not have caught that. So we were trying to elaborate more about cultural differences, right? Where sometimes we allow our cultures to supersede our Islamic principles. So the example was given about hospitality. So let's say, again, Jawad Bhai, you're here again, right? So inshallah, one day I get to meet all of you in your wonderful community in Seattle. I'm sure, of course, Jawad Bhai is going to have me over. I know that for a fact, right? So, or maybe he takes me out. I'm not sure which, right? If there's a good steak place, Jawad Bhai, take notes right now. I want to get some good steak.
I
right?
make good steak too, by the way.
Sorry?
I make a good steak too at home, so no problem.
Oh, okay, fine. Homemade's always better. Hasan. So he invites me over. So he's the host, I'm the guest. Now, if he has two, we get down at the table, everybody's there. There's two options. Either he goes first or I go first, right? Either the host or the guest. In many Eastern cultures, very specifically Desi culture, Indian Pakistani culture. Again, I'm not sure about others, but most Eastern cultures, the principle is the guest should be told to go first and the host shouldn't. They say, look, it's disrespectful for us to eat. No, you're our guest, you eat first. And it sounds very nice. It sounds good. I mean, it makes sense, as we would say, right? But Islam says the exact opposite. Islam says, no, the host should start. And we can, again, if we think about it for a few minutes, maybe we can understand. Sometimes, right, let's say, again, I'm sitting down at this table with Jawad Bhai. The steak looks amazing. Maybe there's some nice sides, some buttered bread, whatever it is. And I'm hungry, I'm starving, I want to go. But a part of me feels a little shameful, right? It's obviously like, I don't want to just dig in and feel like I'm so hungry and I'm starving. It could make me feel a little, undignified. But if Jawad Bhai were to start off first, he's like, he takes a bite and says, okay, I've started, now Bismillah. Then I would feel less shameful. It would be okay for me to start because he's already done so. Or look at the other part of it, when we're going towards the end of the meal. So the end of the meal, normally, again, what happens in Eastern cultures is that the host will finish very quickly, they'll barely eat anything, so that the guest can continue eating all the food that's there. But imagine what place I'd be put in. Let's say Jawad Bhai, he eats, he's probably following in the sunnah of Imam Ali, so he takes, 2-3 bites and then he stops. Now he's just looking at me and I'm just stuffing my face, ounce after steak, and I'm asking for more and more. Like, I'm gonna feel like, look at me, I'm a pig over here eating like this. The other way though, the way that Islam recommends, it's not wajib, it's a recommendation as far as table manners, is Islam says, look, the host should be the first to start so the guest doesn't feel ashamed, and the last one to end. Why? So that the guest doesn't feel ashamed, because that way, no matter when the guest stops, when he's finally done, the host can keep going, and then right after that he'll end, so the guest doesn't feel, oh, I was eating too much, because that always, the host will be more of a pig than the guest will, right? It'll make him feel at ease in that sense. So I think, I hope that's what you kind of wanted as far as an elaboration. If there's any more, then you can, ask a follow-up later.
Let me just 1 second here, because there's also people who tuned in. So brothers and sisters, if you are tuned in to YouTube and you want to ask questions, please feel free to join us our Zoom session. And the Zoom session is, the link is on the website, in the event list there. So please join in and you can ask the questions. And if you want to ask the question from YouTube, you can still go to our website and submit a question, and we'll have somebody look at the website and pass the questions on. So we don't have a question on, perhaps you talked about it, but I don't remember if you talked about it or not. But the question here is, Maulana, there was a question about what are the reasons for chess being haram. I don't remember if this was a discussion, but there's a question. What are the reasons? Salam, there was a question about what are the reasons for chess being haram.
Yeah, so we tangentially mentioned the idea of chess, right? It was in the last Q&A, right? Because somebody asked, we gave the example of many of us hearing when we were young. I heard this when I was young, not just young adult. I kept hearing the same reasoning. The reason chess is haram is because Yazid played it in front of the beloved head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And that was the reason. So we all thought about that. But again, anybody who's a bit smart, a bit wise will say, well, Yazid did a lot of things in front of the head of Imam Hussein, like poetry. If you tell any person to let go of poetry, they're going to go crazy. Say, no, we're not going to do that. So just something being done by Yazid is not the reason for something to be haram. That's not how Islamic fiqh works. And this, I would say, is, look, this would be, so the reason was, we were mentioning it, was to show that sometimes we can, if we educate ourselves a bit more, we can start to pick up on little clues on when a speaker, again, with all due respect, may or may not actually have that much depth or breadth in Islamic teachings. If they say something like that, then again, forgive me, I don't mean to disrespect those kind of speakers, but it shows that they don't have a very traditional Islamic education. If they're not able to understand very simply that somebody's action in the future determines whether something's halal or haram. That's not how it works. So as far as the actual reasons, we have narrations for this, right? So there's a difference of opinion, as many of you know, right? So Ayatul Sistani, for example, hafadhahullah, has the opinion that chess under any circumstance is haram. You have others like Imam Khomeini, Ayatul Khamenei, Ayatul Nasir Makaram Shirazi, Sayyid Fadlallah, may Allah bless them, and all of our marajih, who say no, it's allowed as long as you don't bet. You have one other opinion that I've heard as well. I think it's Sayyid Hakim. who believes that you cannot even look at the game of chess. You can't even look at it. Sayyid Sistani allows you to look but not play. Sayyid Hakim says you can't even look at the pieces. Now, all of this, we obviously don't find this in the Quran. There's no verse in the Quran about shatranj, right? The game which was played back then. That doesn't exist. So everything then jumps to the ahadith. In the narrations, this is where it gets a little tricky, right? You have clear narrations which seem to indicate that chess is haram. Meaning, again, I can't go through every single one because this is a lengthy legal discussion. But there are some where if you and I were to go through them, we'd say, hey, my understanding is that the way the Imam phrases it, that the person who touches a piece of chess, I think this is one of the narrations, a person who touches a piece of chess, their hands will be black on the Day of Judgment. Now, what would you understand from a narration like that? I would understand that. That must mean it's haram, for example. And you have many others that if you look at the game, you will look at death on the Day of Judgment. Again, something like this. So this was a traditional opinion that went on for a while. Then some other scholars, like Imam Khomeini was one of the first, I believe. So when he was going through the same discussion in his, Dars-e Kharij, Bahth al-Kharij classes, when he reached this topic, he said, well, I want to re-examine some of these narrations. And in some of the narrations, he said, look, the concept of shatranj, of chess, is alongside other games of chance, of other gambling games. It's always mentioned simultaneously in narrations. So for him, and again, there's a lot of legal principles that I can't really discuss over here, but using a specific legal principle, he said, look, based on the sort of context that we understand with some of these narrations, we can then understand that what was the impermissible part of chess was the actual betting. And then we look historically, we see that's what the people around the time were doing. They were betting on chess. So for somebody like Imam Khomeini or Ayatollah Khamenei or many other mujtahideen, they focused on the betting aspect. So for them, they said, as long as you don't bet, then it's okay. But again, somebody as respectable as Ayatollah Sistani and many others say, no, I don't have that understanding. That's not the context that I see in history nor in the narrations. So we're going to go by more of a traditional or literal understanding. And chess, no matter what, even if there's no gambling or not, will still be haram. So this is something, again, all these legal discussions are usually, there's pages and pages and weeks worth of discussion, examining each and every narration, the chains, the historical context. So it's very interesting. And these are the things that I think we can slowly start introducing to the community so they get more of a sense of yaqeen in the understandings of their maraja. I think it's very beneficial when people ask these questions. So thank you very much.
So Maulana, I have a question. Actually, another one came here right now. So I'm going to. I have a question. I'll wait my question. I'll give chances to the people here. So this sister is asking, Salam. As far as I could tell, we did not get to the last two lecture topic. Wilaya in the contemporary age, and is there really an afterlife? Are these lectures available online, or could you address them in the future and let us know, please? I think if I may answer this question on your behalf, how about we schedule follow-up sessions with you to continue these topics if they've not been done?
I won't say an immediate no. I'm at your service, obviously. Yeah. So I have to double check if they're online or not. They may be, but again, I have no problem. And if you want to make an interactive session like this where we can discuss it, a traditional lecture, hey, it's up to you. You can discuss. But I'm at your service.
But if you surely for this sister here, if you can give her a pointer if these lectures are available, and we can still. I would like to actually continue the series if things didn't. We'll talk about it separately afterwards, inshallah.
Sure.
Okay.
Inshallah.
So, Sister Mariam, I think Maulana will send you a link, or I will send you a link if these lectures are available. Otherwise, we'll actually have these topics covered later on, inshallah. Okay. The question I was going to ask is something you not touched upon, but you did say COVID-19, right? So I guess it's fair game, right?
Yeah.
When you look at 14 centuries ago, the present-day technologies of Zoom and online stuff was not available, right? And the notion of a congregation in Islam is being in close proximity. Right? And it's kind of interesting, even Ayatollah Sistani says right now that the Jamaat prayer cannot be constituted if it's more than 3 feet apart, yet social distance is requiring 6 feet apart. So my question is more general, what constitutes a congregation? And, in the current situation, for example, the COVID situation may last for a long time. Maybe 9 months, maybe 12 months, right? And we still can, is there thinking that could we do virtual congregations, right? So the Jummah prayer is done, right? And the prayer is valid, right? the thing that this could not have been possible 14 centuries ago because the technological advances were not there, right? And even if they were there, they were not there, first of all, right? It was not accessible to everybody. So I think that, what is the thinking of the Maraji, if you are familiar with this, with regards to virtual congregations?
Awesome. So this is, again, these kind of topics are my favorite, right? Because we're taking these contemporary issues and we're using them to re-examine some of the more traditional topics that come up, right? So I remember initially you talked about, artificial intelligence, which is another lovely topic the other day. So right now you do see some maraji', I don't want to say re-examining, but reapplying, or I don't want to say reapply. They're just applying the principles that they understand, that they've already come to and understood, and they're applying it given a certain situation, right? So for somebody like Ayatollah Sistani, for example, or if I'm, again, I don't want to say Ayatollah Khoui, but given what I understand about his approach, I'm pretty sure it would be the same sort of thing. Or anybody who takes when I say traditional conservative, I don't mean it in a negative way. I don't want anybody to understand that. But these words have a very specific meaning when you're talking about legal context, which usually means that, look, the way that literally the Imam mentions it, that's how you have to understand, because we have no other context from the Imam. So anyway, with that method, Ayatollah Sistani or somebody with that same sort of framework, they would say, look, the Imams have given us the criteria, the conditions, the shara'it, the prerequisites for Islamic laws. Whether it be congregational prayers, whether it be ghusl, wudu, everything, right? It's mentioned like that. So within the narrations mentioned about congregational prayers, the idea of distance is mentioned very literally. Right? It's mentioned that, so-and-so distance needs, if it's more than so-and-so distance, then the jama'ah it's not valid in that sense, right? So somebody who takes that sort of approach, they'll look at the narration, they say, look, we ask the Imam, kind of metaphorically speaking, we see the narrations and they got the answer, the case is done. For some others, like for example, Ayatollah Nasir Mikarim Shirazi, Hafidhahullah, may Allah protect him, and all of our maraji', his approach is slightly different, right? Now he does, again, he is traditional in some sense, but for him, he has applied a different sort of principle as well, which again, I really don't want to get into because that's a longer thing. But for him, if anybody is in his taqleed or has seen, he's given there's a question answer about this. So he has allowed that in the current circumstances, he has allowed the gap to be a bit bigger. So you can have larger congregational gaps, which I forgot the exact distance, but I believe he allows up to 6 feet. So that would allow social distance prayers. That's him. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think more than 6 feet he won't allow, but I don't remember the details. But again, so that would be another thing. There are some other mujtahideen who are, I don't think very well known, but again, there are some respectable ones out there who have given the opinion because they focus more on what we call the, again, spirit of the law, as some people put it. They say, look, congregation was a literal thing back then, but there's this other idea that we can read into that because they didn't have that idea, we can see now apply in our modern day context. And we can have a congregational prayer via Zoom or whatever. So you have the Imam and you have people follow. And they said the only thing that's missing here is the physical distance. But the people are there, they're praying at the same time, right? There's no problem in that sense. So this is how some other mujtahideen, using their legal principles, will apply it. Now, how do you kind of sift through all these? Well, again, this is a legal discussion. So I'm not saying, again, this is not me saying, stop asking questions, right? I don't want to give off that idea. But this requires, obviously, multiple sessions because I have to explain to you each and every single one of these legal theories. And then when I explain to you the legal theories of the, let's say, conservative, moderate, and then let's say, if I want to use the word progressive, if I use those words, right? I have to explain to you their legal theories and principles. And once I do that, I guarantee you're going to question what are their proofs. So I have to prove to you each and every legal theory. So basically, I'll have to go through a full usul al-fiqh class with all of you, which I'm happy to do. But a lot of us are just looking for the quick, like I said, drive-through McDonald's answer. And the whole point is these deeper questions, they're not going to be solved like that. That's why a mujtahid has to spend so many odd years going through different ideas and opinions. They become a mujtahid because they've gone through everything and now they have an opinion on their own. And that's why the maraji', they differ from one another, but they respect one another because they said, look, we don't agree with your principle, but you've applied it. Okay, done. Now, the issue that, and this is a personal issue for me, is people, the lay people, I think they want to get they want a piece of that higher level knowledge. I think people generally want that. And in other countries like Iraq, like Iran, I think it's very easy because, again, you have a mujtahid walking down the street. He's going and he's on the line, at the Noon Vai, right? At the place that's selling naan. And you can go and ask him a question. It's very easy. You can read the books. You can go to high level lectures. Unfortunately, in North America right now, with all due respect, most of the speakers that are out there, I think, are still at a very sort of, I'll call it a superficial propagational level, which again, I'm not discounting. I think that it's beneficial for many, right, to hear some of these details. It's great. If it's improving their iman, wonderful. However, again, this is my own personal humble approach and opinion, because this is what helped me growing up. I like to go for things a little bit deeper. I like to go for the whys. Why did this happen? Give me the full answer. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to study in the first place. And as much as possible, I'd like to bring some of that back to the public back home, so that when they make decisions, it can be a bit more informed. They can have a bit more. I would say if a community goes through even one book, a simple, maybe 20, 30 lessons of an intro to usul al-fiqh, right? Legal theory, legal principles, there would be an exponential increase in the respect for maraji. I guarantee it. There would be an exponential increase in our respect for one another and our difference of opinion. And at the same time, there would be an exponential decrease in people just giving out their opinions randomly, saying, well, I think this about this, and, moon sighting this and that. Like, look, once you understand how law is actually formed, then I think that really changes how we would approach it. And I think there's many people who are interested, and if people...
But,
yeah.
The only thing I would say is I think that the institution Maraji needs to bring in more transparency into the process that's in place, so that people can become more informed. Lay people can be more informed, right? And I think this is really something that needs to be done. For example, if I want to find out something what's going on COVID-19, I can look at Johns Hopkins, I can look at New York University, I can look at Washington, I can look at Oxford, Cambridge. And although I may not understand everything, but I know there's a lot of stuff going on, and I'm able to access the thought process. So I think on these topics, contemporary topics, it'll be interesting to bring about a reform in how the scholarship is done in the Muslim community. Of course, this is distinctly from authority, right? Somebody will have to make an authoritative decision that is quite distinct from different opinions being surfaced, and then somebody picks that this is how I form my opinion, and provide guidance to the community. But guidance to the community in this COVID-19 era, one of the things that concerns me, there's a few more questions here I'll get to, but I want to talk in COVID-19 because I touched it already. One of the things that concerns me is images I see coming in from Shia religious gatherings and places. For example, I saw images from Karbala, people with masks and touching and no 6 foot distancing, and going to the Zari Imam Hussein. I've seen images from North America where people go and will take out tabut and Alamin will touch it, right? And clearly, when you look at the expert knowledge here, they say, look, we don't understand this disease. Be careful, because you could become an asymptomatic carrier and you may actually hurt other people. So what is your recommendation to our community here in Seattle with regards to how we should be offer Azai Hussein in the coming 6 weeks or so?
Sure. So let me address that second. Let me just go back to the other point that you raised first, because again, this is a topic that's I'm very passionate about. So I think and I agree with you about the Maraji, if they're able to, let's say, transfer or create more of a body of knowledge for the communities to be able to understand how they come to decisions more. Again, more of the process-based, as if you remember last year in Toronto, I was explaining there, more of the process-based approach rather than the goal-oriented approach. So this is something I've been advocating for a long time, right? And sometimes that makes you the black sheep of many individuals. But that's another rant I'll do some other time. So here's the issue, I'll say it, and I know you're going to understand what I'm saying. So I know of many different students of the Hawza, many well-respectable scholars, who all they want to do is help the communities learn, being able to respectably understand the controversies, confusions, give them more access to the information. Here's the problem. The ones who finance a lot of projects don't want to finance these things. You tell me how many communities, even right now, I know the person asked a respectable question. Let's just say, again, as an example, a person wanted to come on the member and say, look, for Muharram, I'm going to recite just the most authentic version of the Muharram tragedy, in terms of what comes for me, what's most authentic, or I'll go through the difference of opinion. Which center would invite somebody like that? I can't. I don't think I could name one. Right? Now let's say
you understand Urdu, right?
जी.
तुम दिए बादे मुखालिफ से न घबराए औकाब ये तो चलती है तुझे ऊंचे उड़ाने के लिए.
So this is one example. If we're again, there's a few friends and I who are working on translating different works. So yes, with a COVID example, these articles in medical journals, these are all in English. It's our language we all understand. Even if you don't know the actual medical language, you can find it in your language. So the actual articles, all these things from the Maraja, they're on the sites. They're in Arabic, they're in Farsi, sometimes in Urdu. To make the transfer to English requires translators. We have people who are ready to translate. The problem is they say, look, we are busy doing work, meaning they're doing their studies. They need finances. They said, okay, would anybody like to finance a project? And then Jawad Bhai, you know what's going to happen. They say, no, sorry. All of a sudden, we don't have any funds anymore. They're willing to fund all these other random, again, with all due respect, all these other books. And I've been pay for celebrities to come and Noha Khans. They'll pay thousands of dollars for that. But when they say, look, I'm going to translate for you the Dars-e Kharij discussion of chess or moon sighting, whatever, they say, no, we're not interested.
I would say, let us actually discuss this, take this offline, on how we in North America can move this forward, because we have an obligation to do that, inshallah.
So, the whole point of that saying was, I know many individuals, again, my close circle from Qom, they're very, very willing, but the issue, again, with all due respect, it happens to be financing, right? Because, okay, I'll leave it at that point.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go back to what you're mentioning about recommendation for community. So, the Maraja have said very clearly, right, that you have to follow your local experts, the medical experts, what they're saying, right? Now, they're not going to force anybody. The Maraja are not in the business of forcing anybody. They say, look, the medical experts in your own countries, they'll give the rules, you follow that. So there may be certain states or certain cities, which, for example, may be lower risk. So maybe they may be able to have sessions in person, like you see many in the UK and Canada. They're having their socially distanced programs where everybody comes with masks, there's no hugging or whatever. They try to figure out ways to deal with it. They manage, okay? There are other places, like I'm in Florida right now. There are some places that are doing it in person. My own personal thing is I can understand why they would want to do that. I'm dying to get to a center, I'll tell you, I want to. But at the same time, I know that there's a huge risk, as you're saying, asymptomatic carrying. Florida is a hotspot. We are expecting another peak to happen. For me, I can't bring myself to go out there and perhaps bring that to somebody else, to somebody who has, let's say, pre-existing conditions or whatever. I don't think it's a worthwhile thing. I think we should wait for it to go down and whatever. And again, Seattle was a peak as well for a long time. I'm not sure of the current situation, but again, my own personal understanding is go with your local experts, work together as a community, find whatever sort of middle ground that's possible, and then work through that. And I think in these instances, precaution really happens to be the best principle that we have, with us right now. None of us, yes, would we feel more spiritual if we went in person? Absolutely. Of course, I guess that would be great. However, if let's say you were the asymptomatic carrier, you came to the center and innocently something happened and now it spread to other people in the community. And, God forbid somebody dies because of that. How do you think that's going to weigh on your soul, on your conscience? That's something that it's going to harm you spiritually. So it seems as though that sort of precaution makes sense right now. Now, again, I'm not judging any other community or any other country which is, deciding to open up or do whatever. That's for them to decide. But we have to use the information that we have available and then make I think more precautious decision in each and every situation.
So, Maulana, we'll move on here. This is Mariam and Sarah asking the question. In light of current social injustices and activism occurring across the United States, do we as Shia have an obligation to be actively involved in politics to work towards social justice?
So, alaikum salam. It's yes and no. So my general sort of understanding of this, based on the way that my teachers explained it, is when we have this idea of we as Shia, I don't actually believe we as Shia really exists. I think a lot of us move to this kind of giant diaspora of Shias, and it's not there. Every single one of our communities differs in our knowledge, expertise, in our base, in our intellectual level, in our activism level. So, giving this example, I can see where certain communities, it would make sense for them to, let's say, go to a certain rally. I would say maybe for this community, it makes sense. For another community, I would say you guys shouldn't say a word. Don't talk to the media, don't go out, don't do anything. For you, this community, your job right now is to be more educated, because we know that there's a lot of information. And when there's a lot of information, you can guarantee there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. And that is happening a lot right now. Even look at, without mentioning specific examples, with all the recent shootings, normally what we've gotten are little clips and people jump to make decisions. Then you see a little bit more, just a few more minutes. And then that sometimes can radically change things. We're not here to excuse behavior or anything like that. Injustice is injustice. However, sometimes the way that we become so reactionary, it actually puts us in a worse position. We see in the light of the Ahlul Bayt, they weren't reactionary. They were calculating in every single moment. Every single moment. right? There's a reason, very specifically, Imam Hasan alayhi salam, to use, I think, as a great example. We always jump to Imam Hussein. Right? But look at Imam Hasan, look at Imam Ali. They calculated very well. There's a reason Imam Ali alayhi salam worked with 3 khulafa the whole time. And then finally, after he's pretty much forced to, he becomes the Khalifa. There's principles that we have to figure out there. Why did he do that? Why Imam Hasan fought as much as he could with Muawiyah. And then finally, when he realized he had absolutely no support, when his own followers were trying to assassinate him, he said, I can't go on. I'm going to have to sign a treaty. He was forced to. Then we see again with Imam Hussein, a different sort of strategy used. Then we jump to, for example, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. When you see 2 warring factions, right? The 2 different Abbasids fighting with one another. The Shias ask him, what do we do? He said, stay out of it. So there's many different principles there that we have to analyze and figure out. We have to be careful of just picking and choosing one imam. I don't think that's a very just way of looking at it. And in this situation, we have to do that as well. This requires a lot of research. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So let me add to this. I think that, Maulana, you're absolutely correct. We're going to judge the situation. I think there's a lot of opportunity that we have to work locally in different situations. For example, here for us in Kirkland, there was a Welcoming Kirkland initiative whereby the city of Kirkland wanted various people to get involved in creating a more inviting environment for people of color, specifically black people. And the city of Kirkland is inviting participation from our community regularly. I go to city of Kirkland meetings all the time, right? So, and there are systemic injustices. For example, how our schools are funded, from property taxes. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, you'll always be going to not so good schools. So there's many opportunities. And I'm saying that rather than actually just, as Maulana said, just going with reaction, just be thoughtful and get involved in your local community. Because the local community and the local city leaders, who are quite good, actually, the chief of police and all these people are quite good, help them make the change or push them to make change. And that comes through engagement and active involvement. And I think that active involvement starts with us in the Islamic Center, the IMAN Center. We have gatherings every week, right? We have gatherings quite often, and we can benefit from all of us on what we need to identify, right? There are things we can do and things we cannot do. Right? We cannot decide who's going to be in the White House, but we can go and vote.
That's something.
Right? Yeah. So I think those are the things we need to do. We'll move on here to the next question. How do you balance the need for being factually and historically accurate during Masaib and general sentiments of mourners who want to hear narrations they've heard and evoke emotion? Some might say speakers should not share any narrations unless they are sure it is an accurate tradition. Others are comfortable as long as they have heard it from some source, even though these traditions are not generally accepted as accurate. There may be other views. Where do you stand on this?
So I'll give you the way that I approach it, and then this will also be a subset of how other speakers approach it as well. So for me, like I have already mentioned, I'm not a scholar of history at all. I'm not even a student of history. I have some basic understanding of it, and that's it. For Masaib specifically, I don't understand it as a history lesson, not at all. If somebody wants history, they need to go read the books themselves, right? And even that is because you're only going to get whatever language you have access to. It still won't be full history, right? History itself is a discipline and requires understanding the different approaches to history. So for me, I go by, again, generally speaking, if I can find a credible source for it. Like I'm not concerned with most authentic, more authentic, not in that sense. If there's a credible source for it, if it's in a book of a legitimate scholar, then I'll consider it a possibility, right? And I'll recite that kind of Masaib. I normally do tend to stick to the Masaib, which is normally, if you've heard, I don't really stray from the norm, not necessarily. There's a lot of other, let's say, quite more accurate points, which I didn't mention, and I went for a quote unquote less, again, putting it this way, less accurate, but more well-known point. Although I never recite anything that's false. If it's false, I'm not going to say it, and nobody should say something false. And again, I don't know if there's speakers that do that. Hopefully they don't. But so that's the way I prefer it. I'm doing it as a devotional act. I'm doing it because we want to have the emotional connection. So I prefer to stick with more of the sort of famous, well-known story. Now, again, the idea and the research of history, it's not so simple. Even when it comes to Karbala. See, Karbala is not just some black and white, dry historical event. It's not like you have a bunch of people, reporters writing everything that's happening and that's it. And everybody has the same information. You have followers of the Imam who are present, who left, and they share that information. You have stuff from the ahadith of the Imams themselves. You have narrations from the enemies of the Ahlul Bayt who have narrations. Then you have Christians, you have Jews, you have all these other factors there. That's just the historical sort of corpus of narrations. Then on top of that, You have the poetry, which was recited in front of the imams. Now, let's say one of the poets says, mentions something about an event which took place on Sham-e Ghariban, for example. Let's say the imam is sitting there and he doesn't object and say that's false. Does that automatically mean it's true? Or does that mean the imam understands that he's just saying it poetically? There's a difference of opinion, right? That's how the scholars understand it. It could be that if the imam knew it was false, he would have said, no, don't say that it's false. Or somebody could say, no, the imam knew that it was just it was poetry. So it doesn't matter if it's true or false. It's not a big deal. So there's differences there. Then let's say we have a very famous sort of scholar. I'll give you a famous Ayatul Bahjat, right? May Allah bless his soul. Let's say Ayatul Bahjat. I'm not saying this happened, but I'm giving it as an example. Let's say in his dream, he had a dream that so-and-so happened to Bibi Zainab on Ashura. Now, if somebody respects and understands the spiritual, irfani nature of somebody like Ayatul Bahjat, and he mentions that, then for me, I'd say, look, his dream is authentic to me. I'm not going to deny that. Now, is it in a book? No. Is it written down in some historical source? No. But I understand that he has a relationship that I don't have with the Ahlul Bayt. So someone like me may take that from him and recite that. I wouldn't have a problem with it. Others may say, no, for us, dreams are not an authentic source of history. So it's a difference of opinion there as well. And you'll find some who literally would just stick to what's in a certain book. Others will use a certain collection of books. And others will expand that to poetry and stuff as well. And so I told you where I stand. And I myself, for other preachers, I won't judge a approach that they take, because I feel that I should give them the benefit of the doubt that they are addressing the community that they're going to, and they hopefully, if they've done their research, they know what's best for that specific community.
Yeah. If I may add to this, I think since this question has come up a couple of times already, there's a beautiful set of articles and lectures that Ayatollah Mutahari gave on distortions around Karbala. If you have not read this, I suggest you read this. It's available on alislam.org. A few years ago, I had done lectures here at IMAN Center, where I went through each of these lectures. But I think it's a very good reading. He had done quite a bit of research on this. And really, to me, it was very, very helpful, what he did. So I recommend anybody interested here to familiarize yourself with the work of Ayatollah Mutahari. And now we're going to actually have our last question, and then Maulana, you can wrap up with your comments, and I'll also end towards the end. So hopefully this will be a very quick question response here. Sarah says, it was great that you covered proofs of the existence of a just God. Is there a Shia text that covers this topic all in one place? I say Shia hoping that it will be, by extension, also get into related issues such as free will versus determination, etc.
Awesome. Yeah. So there's many works. Most of them are going to be translations. I don't think I've seen and this is something else that Jawad Bhai, you and I can discuss at some point. We have very few, original works written by English-speaking scholars in that sense. Most of the things happen to be translations, which are fine, but they have a limit, right? Because they're meant for the Islamic world. They're not meant for the Western world. But so a lot of the works on basic Shia theology, they do exist, right? Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayh, he has works. You can find it on Al-Islam about, Shia belief, introduction to Shia belief. Shaykh Mutahari has a few things on Al-Islam. You can find it there. Ayatollah Wahid Khorasani, although he's not really known to be strong in theology, but he also has works on this as well. Ayatollah Nasser Makarim Shirazi has a book on Al-Islam about the belief system of Shias. I think it's called something about resurrection, if I'm not mistaken. Life, history, resurrection, or belief, resurrection, something like that. I think as far as one of the stronger books is one by Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. May Allah give him a long life. He's one of the head philosophers in Qom right now. So he writes it from theology, but with a bit more of a philosophical sort of approach to it. So the original work in Farsi is Amuzish Aqaid, right? Which you can call theological instructions or theological teachings. So this has been translated in English. It should be on Al-Islam. If not, you can easily, if you Google the PDF, you can find it. Theological, I'll type it in the chat as well, right? Theological instructions by Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. And I forgot who the translator is. Now, I will warn you, the translation is not the best. May Allah bless the translator, but it's not the best. It was, I think, done by somebody, the English wasn't their first language. So it would be much better if you could get somebody to do the book with, find a teacher for it, it would be much better. Because there's especially going to be, because this book is used in the Hawza itself. It's used for usually intermediate students, right? But some of the general points you may be able to understand. There's another one that I think would be good as well. And this is again by Shaykh Mutahari, Divine Justice, which goes through some of these topics, not proofs of God, but about some of the free will determination ideas. That should be, you should be able to find it as well. Although, again, if you want to buy the book, books are always better than PDFs.
We
of
have
course,
this
right?
book in the library.
Oh, perfect, right?
Divine
So this is an excellent book. It goes through the concept of justice, of free will, predetermination, a lot of theological issues. Shaykh Mutahari is, again, one of our greatest scholars in terms of explaining theology, deep theology, philosophy, mysticism, a lot of things. In terms of his legal stuff, his history, it wasn't as strong, but again, it's still worth it to read his works. So these are, I think, are two probably some of the better ones. And I think there's maybe one more, which is called, I think, I have to remember the, one sec. I'm trying to remember the name of that.
Did Mujtaba Lari did anything? Mujtaba Lari, did he write anything?
Yes, Mujtaba Lari has it as well. I haven't personally gone through the text, so I'm not sure how strong they are, but it's something else that somebody may be able to go through. I'm just looking for I have another text. I'm just trying to find out. There's another book called Discursive Theology by Dr. and Sheikh Ayatollah Ali Rabbani Gulpegani. Let me just put that. Sorry. Discursive Theology. I'll just put Gulpegani. Rabbani Gulpegani. This one might be a bit more difficult for you to find a PDF, so you may just have to buy it. But so these are a few different options as far as texts that you can go through, but generally because they're translations, because they're normally meant for Hausa students, it would be like you get much more benefit if you would go through it with a teacher. And sometimes you'll find different students will do online classes with these and use these books as a frame of reference. But you can try going through it yourself. And if you have questions, any sort of local scholar that you have or anybody who's well versed in theology and philosophy and mysticism, you can just have your questions answered by them.
Well, we got about 10 minutes left here, so I just want to offer you a chance to conclude, and then I'm going to conclude. I will have the last word, if you don't mind, today.
Of course. What can I say? I can't say anything, huh? You are the host, after all. You're supposed to have the last word, right? Islamically speaking.
I'm following your teachings. Yeah, I'm a good student.
No, alhamdulillah. I think these were. I appreciate everybody, the questions that they raised. I think a lot of them were good ones. I've heard a lot of these before, but that doesn't, I think, discount the value of these questions. I think all of us, and from what I understand here, I think all of you do have a thirst for more. And like all of us, we all do want more. And as I'm going to kind of regurgitate and restate, that thirst for knowledge is a gift from God that he's put in our souls, in our fitra, in our heart. What we're going to be questioned for is how much effort we actually put in going after it, right? And sometimes people say, I hear this all the time, oh, Hassan, there's so much we need to study, nobody's helping us out. And I say, look, with all due respect, I don't know what you're talking about. With the internet, with Zoom, with all the stuff that Jawad Bhai was talking about, my personal humble opinion is nobody has an excuse nowadays. If you have the interest, if you have the resources, which everybody does, you can go and do it. You may say time is not a fact, time management. Well, time management, that's something that a person has to sacrifice. That means maybe you skip out on a meal. Maybe that means you're losing a few hours of sleep. And if you really want the knowledge, you're going to have to sacrifice something. Something has to be given up. And you see that people for other things, they'll sacrifice their family, their time, their money, for their careers sometimes. We should be much more interested in doing this for the sake of our intellectual journeys, right? If we're really trying to get a better understanding of Islam, of Allah, of the Ahlul Bayt, more ma'rifah, perfect our souls, then it's going to take a lot more struggle. And you'll see, the minute you put in just a little bit of effort, we know that Allah rewards it. And he opens these doors for us. And I think with the sort of community that you have and the leadership you have, I think they seem like they are at your disposal and they'll be able to make it happen. So I would use this wonderful community you have and the board that you have, use them at your disposal because it seems like they are willing to support you. So may Allah bless all of you. Please keep us in your du'as. Thank you again for the opportunity to have this discussion. If, again, there was anything which I may have said incorrectly, insufficiently, was disrespectful, whatever, it wasn't my intention. I apologize. Please pray for my forgiveness. If there was any sort of benefit from any of the sessions at all, remember that any benefit is from Allah. It's Allah who guides and who benefits, and it's not from me at all.
Thank you, Maulana, very much for your remarks. I really have enjoyed our interactions right from whenever we started, I don't know, a few months ago. Initially, I was worried that where is this guy? He's late responding my message. Is he going to come through or not? But,
first world problems, Jawad Bhai. First world problems.
I know that your commitment is strong. And it's unfortunate that COVID-19 prevented us from meeting in person. I was very much looking forward to spending quality time with you and our community, spending
Likewise.
time with you. You know, the thing that I found most interesting in listening to you is your sincerity and your devotion and your dedication comes through. So it is our du'as that Allah keeps giving you more strength and more knowledge and more ma'rifah, you know, to be of service to communities around the world. You know, and we pray for your continued success, inshallah. And we hope that we'll be able to see you again soon. You know, I think that personally, we've had many speakers who come here. I'm speaking now personally. I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm just, you know, many people come here. And I find that your topic that you picked were very appropriate for what we have to discuss. I know that it may not resonate with everybody because some people are more in tune or what you might have done. So for them, it may be material might be very basic. But I think for a lot of people, this was very, very useful. In fact, the evidence of this to me was that I received email from Tanzania, as I shared with you, that somebody said, "Hey, I want to listen to these lectures. Are you going to record it or not?" So this is quite evidence to me that, you know, the topic that you pick, you know, it resonates with not only people in North America but everywhere in the world. So I think that the other thing that I find very interesting was that basically you are not imposing your worldview on others. You're saying, "Hey, this is what I have concluded. I'm sharing this with you, right? And I'm sharing because I care for you." And that's the spirit of our community. We care, and because we care, we share, right? And we want to be spiritually vibrant, which is the other point, because, you know, we are rooted in, you know, which is what you're saying. Our identity is rooted in Tawheed, which is spiritual vibrancy. From the spiritual vibrancy, everything emanates from that. So I think certainly on those aspects, I really connected with you, and I think many others also connected with you. You know, I don't think our discussions have kind of concluded from these 12 nights. I will inshallah follow up with you and the committee. And I want to take this moment to thank my committee members, the program committee members, Brother Karim Al-Haddad, who has been reciting Quran every night, and Sister Nafisa, who has also been reading the English translated Quran every night, Brother Hamid Faizi. These are the people who are on the programs committee who help plan out the Muharram program in the program we put out every week. It's a lot of effort that's involved in putting it together, deciding who to invite, how to organize. So I really appreciate, because without their support, we will not be able to do anything. And in fact, I want to give credit to Sister Nafisa, because she was the one who decided to invite you. There was a lot of speakers available, but she said, "Look, you know, we want to invite Sayyid Hasan. He is very going to be very interesting and relevant to what we are discussing." I hope she is not disappointed in what we experienced, and I want to invite her if she wants to say anything before we part company here. So we really want to thank you. And I know that you have a family like everybody else. Right now it's 11:30 at night. You have 2 children and young one, 3 children now, mashallah, right?
Mhm.
Is that right? So I know that
children,
you've been prioritizing us over them for the last 12 nights. And we want to thank your family for sharing you with us. And I hope we have not inconvenienced them too much. Orlando is a very good destination. Unfortunately, there's some things going on there which is kind of got me a little bit disturbed about not only the COVID-19 but also like a little bit disharmony in Sanford Lake Hill area. I hope we can get to the bottom of those things and eliminate any things going on. So I really want to thank you and want to invite you here. And you know where we are. I think you know, our vision for Seattle is very simple. When you ask people where you want to go, they might say, "I want to go to Mecca to do Hajj." I say, "Okay, go to Hajj." And then Medina, pray, do ziyarah, Prophet do the ziyarah. Go to Karbala, Najaf, all these holy sites. After all these holy sites, people ask, "Where do you want to go?" Inshallah, they will say, "I want to go to Seattle." Right? And the reason why they will say this is because this is a spiritually vibrant, caring, sharing community in Seattle. That's our vision. So we hope that you will help us build our vision. And we look forward to a very beneficial relationship in the times forward, whether we visit here or wherever you happen to be. I certainly enjoyed this, and I speak on behalf of the managing committee. You met the members of the managing committee, Brother Hussein Razai, Brother Nouri Mansouri, Brother Mansour Ali Mansour, who is our reciter of Marcia Noha every night, and he is teaching. And here's another thing, he is willing to teach everybody. I'm going to digressing now. So anyway, thank you very much, Sayyid Hasan. And if there's any shortcoming on our part, we definitely ask for forgiveness and a second chance. So Nafisa, if you're around, if you want to say anything, I want to give you an opportunity to share any thoughts you may have to conclude. I'll give you the last word.
I think she logged off.
Okay, probably she's moved on. Okay. Anyway, so Maulana, why don't we just end here? If you can recite Surah Al-Asr all together. All of us recite Surah Al-Asr. Unmute your mic so we can all do it together.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
والعصر
إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
اللهم صل على محمد. Thank you very much. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you so much, everybody. Khuda Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz. تماس الدعاء.
السلامات.